Hi everybody and welcome back to my modeling channel. So today we're gonna build a 737-800 from Zvezda on a scale 1/44. So let's open the box and see what do we have inside. So here is our box and we're gonna review it shortly. So our cockpit is composed initially with our fuselage, as you can see, and the tail is a little bit different, as you can have the options. It's probably the same mold for the 800 Max and the 800. So you have a very fine engravement. Passenger windows are empty, but I think we'll have something later on. It seems like we will have the passenger windows and cockpit windows, but we're gonna close this one for the build, most probably. So let's move on to the second sprue, which is the wing, and the wing is pretty straightforward, like most of the kits we have so far. The kit is made in 3 parts. You'll have the space to put the wings fairing and the engine mounts, and it's also a very fine engravement on both sides. So let's move to the second part, which is the tail and the engines. So as you can see, that must be the difference with the Max and the regular 737, because you have the regular, I think those are CF56, if I remember correctly, but I'm sure some of you will correct me if I'm wrong. You have different type of options for the exhaust of the APU and then the stab. Very fine engravement as well, so it's a very nice little kit. And then the last part, which seems to be common to both kits, as we have, maybe not. So you have the regular winglets, you have the other way, the new winglets type, and you have the classic 800 winglets as well, the fairing and all the undercarriage. So very nice little kit. Then we're gonna move on to some other parts. So it's most of the airliners from Zvezda are coming with a stand. I will use most probably that stand. And we are going to move now to the clear parts. So clear parts, passenger windows, cockpit windows, you have the old options. The first 800 who had those two little windows up the cockpit, and then all the passenger windows. So nothing really hard. And then we're going to move on to our instruction sheet. It's pretty straightforward. You have the kit list, descriptions, and then it's basically an A3 format paper. We will show you all the details and what you have to do. So nothing too hard. And then the last page, you have the livery, and that's bring us to the last part. Basically, it's a Utah Russian carrier. So pretty straightforward. Nothing much not too many details, but very easy to work with. So I'm gonna do that kit will be built for one of my followers who requested me to build him a 737 from Kibris Turkish Airlines. And so I will use those from Baby decals and some other decals for the passenger windows. But so that kit and that build is dedicated to you. So I hope by now, by the time you see that video, you'll have received your kit and it's nicely in your vitrine or on display somewhere. So enough of talking and let's start building. So we're gonna start this model by painting the interior of the wheel bay. So for this, initially we're gonna use yellow-green color. Then of course we're gonna start by assembling our wings, and for this we're gonna prepare the parts. Not much to do. There is just basically the wall inside the wheelway. two of them, and we're gonna put them together. Then we're gonna be able to glue the wings on top of each other, and that's gonna be a pretty easy part. Just a little bit of snapping and making sure that the adjustment fits for both wings. So we're now going to move to the fuselage, and just going to be a small preparation on the parts just to remove the excess plastic on the side. Then we're gonna put our clear part, and as I decided to paint the model, and I just use some passengers windows decals. So preparing all the clear part, then adding a little bit of glue, and then we're gonna add them all around the fuselage. Then I'm gonna use some modeling paste as a ballast that I will put on front of the aircraft, and that will avoid the model to sit on its tail later on. So just gonna put that, make a pre-shape, and then we're gonna glue the fuselage all together. So after preparing our fuselage, we're gonna start now working on the horizontal stabilizer. They are in two parts, just a little bit of prep, still remove the excess plastic from the mold, and then glue them together. And then we're gonna prepare the tail cone. As the kit comes basically for a basic fuselage, and then the tail cone are different between the Max and the 800 Classic, or the new generation. And that will be a little bit of a difference. Then we're going to move on to our engines. We're going to start to put the engine core and the turbine together, and then we're going to put those all together. It's now time to remove all the gaps with some Tamiya putty, and as you realize, on most of those airliners that's the biggest part of the job. So we put that on the gap to cover all the gaps between the fuselage, and as well on the clear part, and also on the passenger windows, as we want to really have a nice smooth surface. And after the putty come the time of sanding down. So basically we're gonna sand down all the excess putty on that model, and after that we'll have to have a nice surface. We're gonna check this out. Sometimes I have to put a second layer of putty to make sure that I close all the gaps. We're now gonna finish our wings. For this 737-800 new generation, we didn't have the wingless option. I mean, the aircraft I'm gonna build don't have the winglets, so we're gonna use the classic, basically the classic wingtip. And for this, well, we're gonna use some extra thin glue. Then of course there will be a little bit of extra work with the putting and sanding down the part. Now we're gonna paint with the Corrugator mix, basically our fan blade, and then we're gonna move on to the further part where we're gonna glue our wings to our fuselage. And for this I will do first the preparation, and then I will glue, basically once the parts are into position, I will glue them together with some very thin Tamiya glue. Then we're gonna move on to the last part of the tail, and for this I will use, again, I have to do a little bit of preparation. Then there is a little bit of sanding as well to have a part perfectly smooth. Then we're gonna check the fitting, add a little bit of glue, and then we're gonna fix it toward our tail. So now we're gonna paint our engine cone with a matte black color from Tamiya, and then we're gonna add a little bit of weathering on those fan blade to give it a little bit more of a texture. So for this I will use the wash, and then we're gonna move on toward the final part of the engine assembly, where we're gonna basically fit the fan blade toward the intake. And now we're gonna put the cowling around the engines, and we're gonna finish the engine all together. So we will now add and close all the gaps between the wings and the fuselage. So for this I will use a white Tamiya putty, which works normally very well, dries much faster than the grey one, I have to say, and sometimes it's even easier to use this one. So I will put that all around the junction between the fuselage and the wings. Then of course once that has dried out, we will remove all the extra putty all around those gaps. Now that our build is almost complete, we're gonna start to rescribe some panel lines who disappeared while we were sanding down the extra putty. So I initially used a razor blade saw, then I purchased recently that new rescribing tool from Trumpeter, and I have to say that it's very handy, especially when you have you are close to an angle, and then like this you don't have much of a problem to do that. Otherwise I still have to say that I really enjoy the old one as well, that I'm still using. Now we're gonna fix our engine pylon basically on the wing, and then we'll be able to move on forward our build. Now it's time to go to the paint booth, and initially what we will do, we will paint the corrugator of these wings. So for the corrugator I use a mix of metallic paint and light gray from Tamiya, and that normally does the trick. The light gray is still pretty dark for me. Then once the paint has cured, we'll mask of course those corrugators, and then we'll be able to proceed on the other layers. So we will now paint a very light gray overall on basically the engine pylons and the wings and the stabilizer. And for this I use a mix of white and light gray from Tamiya. I can't remember the proportion, but normally what I use is the ball dye. So we will now paint the anti-ice. So for this I use some silver metallic paint, and I will do the engine cowl, then I will do the leading edge for my wings and for the horizontal stabilizer. So once we finish with our leading edge, it's now time to use a clear white color, shiny white, matte on white, and that's for the overhaul of the fuselage and the engines and the tail. We'll be able to decal the aircraft later on. But I have to say that when you don't, even if you're not using a primer, it require on most of the cases you require 2 levels of white color on that. Otherwise you can still have some gray reflect on the background of the aircraft. Then we will start painting the gear doors, and for this, and the gear himself in a light gray color. It's still the same mix I've been using for the engines. So we are now moving on the brake units, and for this I use iron metallic paint to paint my brakes unit, and then we will move on to the tires, of course, and for this I will use a matte black. But first of all, now I'm gonna use I will paint basically the exhaust of the engine. So for this I will use a silver color as well, but an enamel paint. And then there is the aft part of the mast, just located just behind those engines, and this I will use an iron gun or iron metallic paint. So now we're moving on to the tires, and for this I use a black matte from Tamiya as well. So we'll now move on to the decaling part, and for those I've been using Baby decals. I've been using them a lot in the past, mainly for Turkish liveries airplanes, and I have to say they are very easy to work with, very soft and but robust in the same time, and they will adhere perfectly to any rough surface, so it's very easy to work with. The only dark side is you have to add an extra set if you want windows decal or the cockpit details. All those have to be brought either from a kit, the kit you are using normally, or you have to bring a spare set from another decal factory. But overall, on the overall, I have to say that I was still very pleased to work with those decals, and they are really easy to work with. So after working on the left side and they are drying, so we're going to start building now our undercarriage, and that 737 is in 3 or 4 pieces for the nose gear, and then we're going to move on to the undercarriage, the main landing gear, and then we'll fix them on the aircraft, and later on we're going to move again toward the decaling of the aircraft. So now that the KTHYs are fixed, we're gonna fix our undercarriage, but the tires will come a little bit later on during that process. So now we will move on to the cockpit windows or the windscreen, and also all the left side, but all the structural panel basically. So it's going to be the doors, emergency exits, panel lines on the wings, tail numbers maybe, and all those little smaller decals. So now the last part of the build is we are going to put our tires or our wheels basically on the model, and then let it dry and see how it fits on the stand. So we're getting close to the end. Now we're gonna fix our nose gear door, and they've been already decaled and pre-painted, of course. As you could see, that's a little bit early, and then we're gonna add the little decals on them and make sure that everything is done the right way. Then we will be able to finish that model. So we're gonna put some of the last passenger windows, then we're gonna put our horizontal stabilizer, and the model will be ready for display. And this is the final result of that 737-800 from Kibris Cyprus Airways. And I hope you enjoyed that build with me. If you did so, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I give a special thank to my follower who asked me to build that model for him. So thank you for watching, and please do not hesitate to contact me if you want any model.